Well, a new commitment has been announced, or rather, an old commitment has finally been announced. Plus, we're taking your questions on Pitt football, basketball, and recruiting. All that and more on the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Friday. It's the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Got to the end of the week with me, Chris Peak, from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Everything you need is right there at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk with other Pitt fans all day, every day, online at Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you check it out to get all of the Pitt sports coverage. And, of course, right here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And that way you will never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. The live Panther-Lair show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. These morning Pitt videos that we release every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Or anything else that we might pop on there. Pitt video related, all at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you don't miss any of it. So go and subscribe, like this video, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So it's our mailbag edition. It's what we do every Friday. We have the mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt. Take questions from Pitt fans and subscribers on Panther-Lair.com. Our Between Fifth and Forbes premium message board. We take all the questions there, and then we answer as many of them as we can, or as many as I want to, on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. But we got some news to get to first. Jeremiah Marcelin, a 3-star linebacker from South Florida, a kid from Miami, has committed to Pitt, or rather, he announced his commitment to Pitt yesterday. He actually committed to Pitt about 20 days ago. Marcelin was part of the first official visit weekend. You remember we had 13 confirmed names and one mystery visitor who would not reveal himself nor his commitment, and that was Jeremiah Marcelin. He was visitor number 14 that weekend. He was commitment number 5 that weekend. It makes 20 announced commitments for Pitt in the 2024 recruiting class, to go with 2 guys who have still not announced. As of the time when Marcelin announced his commitment, Pitt's recruiting class moved into up to number 11. Now that'll keep moving up and down when Pitt gets more recruits or other schools get more commitments, but still sitting firmly in the top 12, top 15, right outside the edge of the top 10. Pretty good place for Pitt to be. And as we talked about on yesterday's Morning Pitt, pretty good chance to add a few more 4-star recruits, which are going to help cement Pitt in that range, that top 20, top 25 range, which is ultimately where they should settle. But Marcelin is a really good commitment. A 6'2", 230-pound linebacker, can play any of the 3 linebacker spots. Pitt seems to like him most as a middle linebacker. They've talked to Cameron Lindsay about playing there as well. I don't think there's any kind of conflict there. There's enough overlap between middle linebacker and money linebacker in this defense that guys could play either one, and if they're athletic enough, they could play the star linebacker as well. And it seems like Ryan Manilak, Pitt's linebacker coach, talked to Jeremiah Marcelin about doing exactly that. Marcelin was pretty sold on Pitt by the time he arrived for his official visit. He had taken an unofficial visit in the spring and said that as soon as the plane wheels touched down, he said, yeah, this is it, I'm home. And touchdown in Pittsburgh, not touchdown at the end of his official visit, but touchdown at the beginning of his official visit. So he was still at the airport, probably just turning his phone out of airplane mode when he said, yeah, this is where I want to go. He committed to Pat Narduzzi on Sunday of his official visit weekend, ended up going and taking subsequent official visits to Maryland and Louisville, wanted to make sure he was doing his due diligence, compared them all to Pitt, and Pitt still won out. Marcelin is now in the class. Pitt now has 3 linebackers committed for this recruiting class, and it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens this weekend. We talked about DJ McCormick, the Central Florida commit, who is here on an official visit this weekend. He's a linebacker prospect as well, likes Pitt a lot. We'll see if they make a push to land him and try to shoot for 4 linebackers in this class, or sit tight with 3, which is how many they signed last year. We've talked a lot about the linebacker situation. Talked about the need for numbers in this year's recruiting class. Talked about how last year's class helped rebuild the depth. This year's class, they need it again. It's a question of whether they need 3 or 4 guys. If they decide they want to take 4, either because they need 4 to add to the depth chart, or because they because they want a 4th linebacker just as insurance against a decommitment. Either way, I could see them taking someone like McCormick if they have an opportunity to get him. I could also see them standing pat with 3 linebackers. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. So that's the big news, a new commitment added to the list. Jeremiah Marcelin, again, he's been committed for about 3 weeks, but he made it public yesterday. So we had to get to that before we jump into the questions. And so let's do that right now. Let's scroll down through. I forget which questions I got to and which ones I didn't get to last week. I forget if we answered Rhino527. He says, what recruits do you think Pitt will be fighting to keep in the class, like Jordan Baston, Shadarian Harrison last year? And I mean, I think the top one, I think Marcelin's going to be one who's going to be getting a lot of attention from college coaches. And I think Caleb Holmes, the offensive lineman from Georgia, is one of the first names that comes to mind as a guy who's going to, it's going to be a battle to hold on to him all the way through. I think he's sincere in his Pitt commitment. I think he wants to be at Pitt, but other schools are going to be pushing pretty hard for him, and Pitt's going to have to fight pretty hard to hold on to him. So those would be a couple of guys that I would point to in addition to some of the 4-star guys and those higher rated guys that they get. And of course, if they end up with a quarterback commitment, you're always sort of in danger, I guess, of having those guys get chased if another school loses its quarterback commitment. And I think I talked about this on the live show on Wednesday night about, whoever they get, if they land a commitment this summer, you're going to be fighting and scratching and clawing to hold on to that guy through the end of the recruiting cycle. So you're always going to be watching for that. They don't have a quarterback yet, but assuming they get a commitment this summer, that's going to be a real storyline. RNC21 says, with these commitment announcements, it seems like Chris and Jim know who the commit is, but keep it private. What percentage of the time of these announcements do either of you know what the recruit is going to pick? And when's the last time you were surprised in terms of expecting the recruit to pick Pitt and he picked another school or vice versa? Surprises happen all the time. Usually by the time you get to a commitment announcement, we know if it's going to be Pitt or the field. I shouldn't say no, but we have a pretty good sense of whether it's going to be Pitt or the field. There's a decent percentage of these commitment announcements where we do have some insight ahead of time. Usually if, I'll tell you, not to get too into details here, but generally my policy is, look, if a recruit tells me that he committed to a school and wants to keep it quiet, I'm going to respect that. I appreciate him sharing that info with me. There's a lot I can do to prepare for him to make his announcement, and I'll respect his wishes as far as keeping it on the down low, as they say. Now, there's times where we learn about commitments through other ways, and so we'll share what we can on the message boards. I think a lot of times when you go through June and there's a lot of commitments out there, and we have a sense of who these guys are, we'll try to work it out with them to get at least an interview done ahead of time, so it saves us and saves the saves us having to make a phone call after the announcement, saves the recruit having to do an extra interview after the announcement. And so we're able to get some of those done. I don't know what the percentage would be, but, sometimes we have those interviews done. Sometimes we just know who it's going to be, so we have things pre-written. Sometimes we don't know who it's going to be, and we just write really fast when the time comes. I don't know what a percentage would be, and surprises, surprises happen all the time. I think. But like I say, by the time we get to a commitment announcement, we usually have a pretty solid idea. If not what school the kid's going to, we have a pretty solid idea if it's Pitt or the field, if that makes sense. H2P_JC. Now, this question was from last week, so we'll preface it with that. It says, if you had to answer today, who does Pitt sign at the quarterback spot, Trevor Jackson or Henry Hasselbeck? The momentum with Hasselbeck seems to be pointing toward Michigan State. So at this point, out of those two, I would say it's more likely that they'll sign Trevor Jackson. That's going to be a main point of focus here over the next few weeks. We talked about that on the message boards a lot yesterday when we had the news that Henry Hasselbeck was not going to be coming on his official visit, and that still seems to be the case. So Jackson would seem to be the more likely option. Who knows, by the time you watch this video, Hasselbeck may have committed to Michigan State already. So that seems to be where those things are headed, in which case Jackson is the more likely pick out of those two at least. Berg B says, if a commitment happens in a forest and the commit never announces and continues taking visits, does the pat signal make a sound? It's funny because we're talking about this, the day after Jeremiah Marcelin announces his commitment, which he announced, almost 3 weeks after he made the commitment. He made a commitment to Pat Narduzzi and Pitt, and then went and took 2 more official visits. I mean, this is just what the reality is. This is just what the world of recruiting is right now. And I think if you get a commitment on the first or second weekend of June, for the majority of guys, you almost sort of assume they're still going to take another official visit or two. Your best case scenario, ideally, you would just have a kid would commit and he would cancel all his visits, and that's it. He loves Pitt, and it's all over until signing day when they can finally put their name on the paper, But that's just not how it works out a lot of times these days. And guys will commit and still take other visits. And you have to hope that the job you did on the official visit was strong enough to keep their commitment in place. That was certainly the case with Jeremiah Marcelin. He took visits to Maryland and Louisville and said, Pitt is still it for me. And some guys are going to do that, and some guys are going to say, no, actually, I like this other place better. You're going to have that. That's going to happen. But it's just sort of what it is now. And so we'll play this game where Pat Narduzzi sends out his commitment tweet, his Pitt is it tweet, and then we'll try and find out who it is, and then we'll see if they take other visits and kind of follow the bouncing ball along that round. All right, let's get into that. That's just about all the questions from last week. We're getting into some of the questions from this week now. Chris 46, is Pitt done with the tight end position this year now? I don't know what to, I have not had answers on the tight end position and tight end recruiting and the tight end situation for years. I really haven't. It's been years since I had any kind of answers on tight end. I don't know. They've got Eric Ingwerson seemingly locked up. They were looking to bring in Carson Conkle for a visit this weekend, but I think he committed to like Illinois or someplace. There are other targets. They had Cameron Clark in for a visit a couple of weeks ago, and he committed to Ole Miss. I don't know. I think they need 2 tight ends in this class, but if you strike out on all your top targets, do you take a guy just to take a guy? It might have to be back to the transfer portal this year. And maybe for the next few years to try until they can recruit well enough, enough quality and enough quantity to rebuild that room. Are they done for this year? I don't think they should be, but it's a question of how far deep you want to dig. R. Doyle 65 says, any chance Brian Robinson makes it in for a surprise official visit this weekend? For how much he visited unofficially, it does not make sense that he wouldn't at least come for an official. So Brian Robinson, 4-star outside linebacker, probably defensive end at the next level, from Austintown Fitch High School in Youngstown, Ohio, was at Pitt almost as much as I was this spring for spring practices. He really likes Charlie Partridge. He's got a great connection there. And yeah, I've been keeping an eye out for an official visit from Brian Robinson as well. I don't think it's happening this weekend. It didn't happen in June. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen in the fall or the winter, which means you need Brian Robinson to hold off on committing to have a shot. Michigan has long been thought to be the favorite. He's got a big-time offer sheet befitting a 4-star defensive end prospect and one of the best defensive recruits in the country. But Pitt seems to be in it. They're not going to win it if they don't get an official visit, though. So he needs to, for Pitt, Robinson needs to hold off on committing until December and come to Pitt and take an official visit. That'll be their best chance. And if he does hold off on committing, I would expect him to be at least 1 game this fall, if not 2. Jam05 Pitt says, I like having Wofford as the opener. What side of the ball do you think will need more time to get adjusted? Defense with the departure of Dennis in the middle and Hill and Hallett on the back end, or offense with obviously Dracovic taking over at quarterback, although knowing Signetti's system and a lack of depth at the receiver position? I think defense is going to have the bigger adjustment. I really do. I think that's where it's going to be, that's where you're replacing 6 starters. That's where you've got, not just Dennis and Hill and Hallett, but also Kalijah Cansey's gone up front. John Morgan, Habib Baldonado, Deslin Alexandra. You've got veterans who are gone, guys who have played a lot of games, made a lot of starts, and very productive players. With Cansey, Baldonado, Dennis, Hill, Hallett. These are really productive players who played a lot of snaps for Pitt and were a big part of the defensive success over the not just last year, but last 2 years. You look at the ACC championship defense, a lot of it was built around Hallett, Hill, Dennis, Cansey, Baldonado. These guys made a huge impact that season and in that game. and they're all gone now. So I think there is, and I've talked about this a bunch of times, a period of adjustment for the defense that it's going to take a little while for them to really settle in. And for the new guys, whether it's Shane Simon stepping in at middle linebacker or some of the, see if a young defensive tackle steps up like a Sean Fitzsimmons, certainly young defensive ends, or if not young, then just new faces, guys like Deion Hayes and Bam Brima. Or in the back end, the safeties with Javon McIntyre and Stephon Hall and P.J. O'Brien and Donovan McMillan. These are good players. I mean, these are all good players front to back. I really like, their potential. I think they can be really good, but it's just I think it's going to take some time. And Wofford will be a good way to open up, but we also know how Pat Narduzzi approaches those games. He doesn't always get real aggressive in terms of going after it in those games and using them as a practice. It's more let's get out, healthy and with a win. Find the next question. Smenges says, how does Phil Jaques play to date when healthy compare to pre-2001 Kenny Pickett? Do you see a lot of similarities, differences? So I think it's a tricky question. Obviously, Kenny Pickett's 2021 was one of the best seasons by a quarterback in school history. 2019, he threw for 3,000 yards, but only 13 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Same amount of touchdowns and interceptions he had in 2020. Phil Jaques, in his best year, the 2020 season, threw for 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 5 picks. So better touchdown and interception numbers. He completed 61%. Pickett was right around 61% in 2019 and 2020. So I think you see similar numbers. Let's look at yards per attempt. Yards per attempt for Jaques in 2020, he averaged 8 yards per attempt, and 7.6. In the next year, 2021, he averaged 9.5 yards per attempt. Kenny Pickett never averaged more than 6.8 under Mark Whipple. Until that senior season, he never averaged better than 7.3. I always fall into this trap of going heavy on numbers during these Morning Pitt episodes, but the reality is if you can't see the numbers I'm looking at, it doesn't mean a whole lot to you. The numbers are similar. I think you look at Jaques' best year as being 2020, his first year at Boston College, when he threw 17 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, 61% completion, and averaged 7.6 yards per attempt. I mean, that's at least equal to, if not better than, any season Kenny Pickett had before his 2021 Heisman Trophy finalist year. Similar completion percentages, similar yards per attempt, and better touchdown to interception ratio for Jaques. So I think the comparison is that if it doesn't entirely favor Jaques, it favors him at least a little bit. And, and he was certainly no worse than Pickett in those first few years. But, of course, Phil Jaques has Frank Cignetti calling the plays for him in this final season, whereas Pickett had Mark Whipple. A little bit of a different situation. Not necessarily saying one is better or worse, but in terms of maximizing the passing game, I think Whipple's got a little bit better of a track record. Previn says, or P. Revin, I don't know how you want to pronounce that, but he says, if you weren't in, or he or she, they say, if you weren't in charge of the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news, what would you be doing for your career? Dear Lord, I have no idea. I have that thought every now and then, and it frightens me to my core because I have really no marketable, useful skills. And that's not like some kind of fake humility or something like that. I mean, that's just the reality. I got an English lit degree. What are you going to do with an English lit degree? You know what I did with an English lit degree when I graduated from Pitt? I delivered pizzas for like 2 years. Seriously, eats a pizza. It's a good. But really, it's just okay. I delivered pizza for Eats a Pizza, which was on, what street was that? One of those, that like cross street where Duke's was in North Oakland. I think now there was like a Chipotle and a Qdoba back to back, or Penn Station or something like that. Yeah, delivered there, and then at Papa John's up further up, losing track of all, Baum Boulevard. Anyway, yeah, so that's what I did with an English lit degree before I started writing here. So it frightens me to think what I might be doing if I wasn't doing this job, because I really don't know. I mean, if you're hiring and you think I'd be a good employee for you in whatever your career is, or whatever your field is, let me know, because I don't really have a whole lot to go on. It's pretty much this or nothing. So I hope my wife didn't hear me just say that. Let's see here if we can get one more question in. We got a bunch of questions. I just want to finish it up. Here's a good one to end on. D. Wasson7 says, what do you see for the future with Charlie Partridge? Can Pitt keep Partridge around for the long term, or a bigger opportunity come around before, or will a bigger opportunity come around that he will want to take? Also, could you see a scenario where Bates leaves and Partridge becomes the DC? So Charlie Partridge is obviously one of Pitt's most valuable assets in terms of the coaching staff. I think they've stepped up multiple times to keep him here. I think he's had opportunities to go other places, probably, and I don't know this for a fact, but probably for more money. And they've stepped up and kept him here each time. It's a huge credit to Pat Narduzzi, credit to Heather Lyke, credit to the athletic department, everybody who was involved in keeping Charlie Partridge in place. Eventually, he's going to go somewhere else, I would think. Eventually, he's going to go somewhere else. Would he want to be defensive coordinator? I think that's an interesting question. I don't know what Charlie Partridge's intentions are. He had his time as a head coach. I don't know if he was kind of soured on that experience because it didn't go so hot at I think he was at Florida Atlantic. So he might not be all that eager to be in the big chair again. Would he want to make a step halfway there with a coordinator role? It's a good question. It would certainly be an opportunity for Pitt to pay him more money if Randy Bates were to retire, although I think Bates is going to stick around for another couple of years. But, I mean, Pitt will probably have to step up and keep Partridge again. I don't expect to see too many more years like this where they retain the entire coaching staff. I think it's only happened twice under Pat Narduzzi. And I don't think, I think that'll be uncommon. You know what I mean? I think that's an atypical kind of offseason for most college football programs, and certainly for Pitt under Narduzzi. More often than not, somebody has left or been fired. So there will come a point when Randy Bates retires, or Dave Borbely retires, or they change offensive coordinators again, or Charlie Partridge gets that opportunity he just can't pass up, or Corey Sanders gets that opportunity he can't pass up. You have good coaches on this staff, and they continue to have success on the field and in recruiting. And when that happens, I mean, you're going to draw attention, and other schools are going to take notice, and they're going to want to get your guys. Eventually, you're not going to be able to hold on to all of them, even though you're going to try. You're not going to be able to hold on to all of them. It's just a question of who goes and when. So I don't know what the future holds for Charlie Partridge. I think he's going to be at Pitt at least for a couple more years. He's got his family is here. I think he has kids that are still in school, so he might want to wait it out until they can finish their schooling in Western Pennsylvania. Maybe that's the goal for Charlie Partridge, but I think it's going to get tougher and tougher, and you're going to have to keep doing more and more to hold on to him, and rightfully so. He's deserved it. If anybody's earned his pay, Charlie Partridge has done so. All right, we have questions left over, but we'll save those for next Friday. I always like to keep a few in whatever you want to call it, keep a few locked in and ready to go, so we have some in case the next time I put out a call for questions, if nobody answers, I like to have some fallback options there. So we've got those for next week, and we'll take even more questions on top of that. But thanks for tuning in this week. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun week here on the Morning Pitt. It's been a fun week on Panther-Lair.com, and this weekend is sure to be even more of the same. I'm probably going to be more commitments coming in. We'll have lots of coverage, of course, at Panther-Lair.com, so stay tuned. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And when you're done with that, have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in this week. Thanks for watching the Morning Pitt Mailbag today. Have a good weekend, and we will get back with you on Monday to recap the official visit weekend on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.